Yo, and welcome to Beyond the Cot, the F3 Knoxville podcast, streaming live from Knoxville, Tennessee, where we focus in on connecting and growing the men of F3 Knoxville and beyond in all three F's: fitness, fellowship, and faith, and also center in on calling out the champion in every single man that posted F3, whether that's here in F3 Knoxville, here in the state of Tennessee, or anywhere in F3 Nation. We want to call out the champion in you. So you'll hear from our guys here in Knoxville, you'll hear from guys in Tennessee, you'll hear from guys in F3 Nation about the authentic lives they are living as high impact men, and as we get to do this crazy thing called iron sharpens iron together, not only in F3, but also beyond the cot. What is up, everyone? Hope y'all are doing well. This is Steam, host of Beyond the Cot, the F3 Knoxville podcast. I know it has been a hot minute since we dropped an episode, but y'all, we are back, and I am pumped for the message that we get into in this episode. I'm going to say that one more time. I am pumped for the message that we get into in this episode, specifically with the guy that I talked to. If you're in F3 Knoxville, you know this guy. His name is Junk, not only because he goes beast mode in the gloom, but he goes beast mode behind a grill. If you know, you know. If you don't, add it to the 2021 to-do list and thank me later. Also thank Junk later. We dive into some awesome things tonight, everything from embrace the suck to going through really hard things, just to living and cultivating a sense of gratitude in our lives. I don't want to give anything away. I want to give a quick shout out to Junk just for being on and just diving into some of the things we'll get into. But to all our listeners, wherever you are, man, I hope this message blesses you wherever it finds you. Thank you. I appreciate you. And without further ado, let's get into embracing the suck, going through hard things, and living a life of gratitude.
Steam, what's up, my man?
Junk, how are you, my friend?
Not too bad. Sounds like a powerful microphone on your end there, my brother.
Oh, hello, testing. Hey, I got some new equipment. I did, and I think it's working. So that is a plus.
Yeah, it sounds phenomenal. I went ahead and went with the wired headphones tonight, so we get the best possible signal. So,
well, I tried them with AirPods, and they would just either crapped out on me, or the Bluetooth had a little mess up, and I figured, well, it'd probably make sense just to plug it in.
Yep.
And just to get a mic that's not too expensive. So I got one off Amazon, and it's actually worked pretty well, I think. So
that's cool.
Yeah. How are you? Happy Thursday.
Yeah, heck yeah, dude. I'm 24 hours out of quarantine from COVID, which is a plus.
Congrats.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. My folks came to visit for Thanksgiving and brought COVID with them. So it was pretty exciting.
That is a gift that I hope no one else receives.
It kept on giving. It was pretty funny. So my dad's a pastor of a little church, and they, it's a small church in Florida, and they've got a lot of folks who are in their 50s and 60s and 70s, but they've all been just dying to see each other. And so they decided, hey, let's have a potluck dinner the week before Thanksgiving. And so they got 60 or 70 people together from 15 different homes, and no surprise, there's a whole bunch of folks that caught it from there. I'm like, oh gosh, guys, it just, okay, this is how it works.
Oh man, but you're healthy,
Precisely.
So you did your time.
Exactly.
And you're back.
Yep, my 4 kids had about 8 hours worth of symptoms each. My wife, who we'll talk about more later, had probably 3 or 4 days of body aches and stuff, and I was about the same. So thankfully, we were in good shape and had no worse issues than that.
That is definitely a blessing, for sure. And honestly, that was the same with me. So when I got COVID, and I think other people have reported the same, or likely the same, of feeling sick for a couple days, have some of the symptoms, and then you're just doing your time, right?
Yep.
You're just quarantining, playing it safe. Definitely want to choose the higher road on that one. But I'm glad you and the family are safe, especially the kids and the wife too. I mean, you obviously as well, but the whole family collectively is healthy and safe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I just was thinking about some of the things we want to talk about tonight, and you look at something like like COVID. You spend months thinking about, wondering about, worrying about, fearing about, or just kind of blowing it off and being like, oh, whatever. And then it comes to, oh, wait, is this actually happening? And then, hey, positive test. And like you said, then it is, okay, I'm in the middle of this. What's going on? What am I feeling? What, is this the worst thing ever or is it not? And obviously there's a wide gamut of stuff. But it's so interesting. My wife was saying, we kind of went through our quarantine time and health issues. Like, now I feel like I can go somewhere and not be worried and not be afraid. And I was like, that's kind of funny. I've been going around not being afraid all this time. But it just shows you how different, people can be and how they kind of perceive something. But how much our inner thought life and our worries and our fears and our anxieties really play out in our experience of daily life.
Oh, man, exactly. Think about the dialogue that you probably do with yourself every day, and especially in a heightened COVID season, you probably take that to the nth degree. I know I do, of thinking, I talk to myself, I play things out in my head, and in COVID, just like you said, it is probably a little more active of, okay, so if I do this, then this could happen, or if I don't do this, then this might happen, or if my family does this, then we could be doing this, and so you think about all these scenarios, and there's not one best way to do it, and at the end of the day, I think we all have to decide kind of what is safest and best for us, and how we feel we are being led to lead our families, and in your case, your wife and kids as well. So
yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah, it was interesting. When the things first really broke out last spring, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. But my wife had just finished treatment for cancer, like 9 months worth of treatment. And we went immediately into COVID. And so, then that was back when there was so little good information and there was things breaking of, oh, here's what it looks like in China. Oh, wait, no, by the way, here's Italy. Oh, there's New York, and all that stuff. And it just is it was such a different time then than it is now. And so now we're, 6-8 months later, we have a lot better information. We have a lot more life experience. And we can look at it and say, okay, at the beginning, it was every man for himself. And, hopefully over the last 6 months or so, it's really been more of us getting to the point where we're like, you know what, I'm going to choose to make the best decision for people around me instead of just what I want.
Oh, absolutely. I fell into that too, initially of, well, I'm a pretty healthy guy, and I can still work out and still do these things. And just like you said, I think now we're transitioning to this place, if we haven't already been in this place of, all right, well, just like F3, like I'm thinking about, man, I want this guy to go back and be safe and healthy with his family and his kids, and how can I facilitate that in a healthy and responsible way? And really, I think what it boils down to is how can I care for these people, or how can I care for this person well? And maybe that's just not taking unnecessary precautions or unnecessary risks, I should say, and thinking those things through a little more, which I have had to learn how to do, especially with grandparents, very close in town, and my family, and so I've done exactly what you have said. I've had to almost kind of replay and reframe that in my own mind of, how can I care for this person well?
Yeah.
By what I do and what I don't do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the whole notion of iron sharpens iron. We should be thinking about the man across the cot from us and not just about ourselves. And that's really what we're all called to as men, and, as men of faith in general. But it really should put a face on it when you're looking across, and of course you're all sweating and steamy and all that kind of stuff, but you're looking across, and that man doesn't just represent a man, it represents an employer or an employee and an office full of people and a wife and children. And there's a whole lot more than just a dude who's sweaty like I'm sweaty. That's my brother. I want him healthy. I want me healthy. I want all of us taking care of each other. We had a conversation on the leadership channel earlier about, numbers have risen some. And so I want to make sure that we're helping everybody who wants to be able to be out still and getting out into the gloom and needs to be there. And the guys that need to be home for one reason or another, or are concerned about it, for them to know that they're still cared for and loved and a part of the packs, whether they're actually out posting right now or they're at home doing a wad in their driveway.
Yes, absolutely. And to me, that's just being a good him. I mean,
Yep.
that is just living that out day one. A topic that we've touched on the podcast before is, being a high impact man doesn't just end after the bomb or after the cot. Like, being a high impact man should exist far beyond the cot, and especially how we treat others and how we care well for others, and especially in a heightened season like we've been in since March, or since it feels like the whole year. I think that question has been brought to the forefront a lot more in people's minds, because that is someone's son, or that is someone's father, that is someone's boss, or that's someone's coworker. And I think that's a really good way of reframing that mindset of, I'm someone's son, I would want to be cared for. And I think it's safe to say across the board, one thing I really have seen that F3 Knoxville guys have done well is really take that to heart. Of, we may have different opinions on how this should happen, how this should go about, but we really do think about the best for each other. Now, we may have different opinions about how that looks, but at the end of the day, I can count on you wanting to do the best thing for me, and vice versa. And that's exactly how it should be within the F3 circle. And when we go back to our families and to our spheres of influence that we're called to as well.
Absolutely. And into our communities. I mean, ultimately it goes back to the very basic foundation of what F3 is for. And that is invigorating male leadership in the community. And if we can't lead ourselves well and lead the people we love well, how can we possibly lead folks that we know tangentially or don't know at all, if we're not, leading those small circles well first?
Yes, man, so good. That is the question, I think, man. How can we lead others well if we can't lead ourselves well?
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a hard question to ask yourself.
It really is. And we even as we talk about something, whether it's as big and global as COVID, or as simple and small as an individual problems like losing a job, or having some of the stuff we're going to talk about in my life. The real question is, how can we look at our circumstances and then look beyond our circumstances, and not just experience the negative of what's happening, at this moment, or what's being limited right now, but look at what else is there. We have this terminology, and one of my favorite things I learned very early on in F3. I've been around for a couple of years now, I think about 4 or 5 years, and I hadn't worked out in a decade before I jumped back into F3. I was a college football player. When I finished playing, I was like, I'm never lifting weights again. This is terrible. I don't want to exercise. Surprisingly, I gained a bunch of weight. There's a real shock. And then my first couple of days out at F3, I remember people talking about embrace the suck. And I caught on to that of like, oh, wow. Okay, this just reminds me of being in the middle of two-a-days. It's, yes, you work hard so that you get the benefits from that. Well, what if embrace the suck is more than just about mental toughness or discipline? What if it's more than just about dealing with how hard things are in a moment, or just kind of muscling through? What if embrace the suck is bigger than that? What if there's a value that you can find by embracing the suck, not just for the simple purpose of getting through the hard thing, but for finding the significant value that's there in the middle of the hard thing, after the hard thing, even looking back on the hard thing?
Oh man, that's so good. That is so good. Gosh, have you heard the term Ebenezer before?
Flesh it out for us.
Yeah. So I was just introduced to that term like a couple years ago, and just thought it was really cool. From my understanding, an Ebenezer is something that you can look back to in your life where the Lord was just faithful and just showed up, and somewhere the Lord was just good, and somewhere where God was God, and so I immediately think of that tying in with embrace the suck moments or these Ebenezer's in our life. Thinking back to, man, that was really hard, but here I am still standing. And I didn't go for that, or I didn't go through that just to go through that. Like I know there's a purpose, and I know I gained something out of that. Just like Ebenezer's of, I can point back to a time in my life that was, man, I did not see what the Lord was doing then, but looking back, what a beautiful moment that was, that God was just caring for me super well. Just like the embrace the suck moments. I love that so much. And it doesn't obviously apply to rucking solely, obviously, anything hard in our lives that we do, it's just a good mentality, maybe something that's really hard for you. It is less hard for me, and maybe something that is really challenging me at this moment is something that you can step in and be like, hey man, I embraced the suck through that like a couple years ago. Let's talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love the idea of the Ebenezer, and, one of the things I love about F3 and the three F's, your fitness, your fellowship, and your faith. And the fitness and the fellowship, most of us just kind of run into, and that's no big deal. And, F3 Nation does a good job of kind of walking that line of, what does it mean to be about faith and not about a single, faith itself. Now, you and I, as Christians, we look at something like, you hear the word Ebenezer and go, oh, well, okay, so here's the story. Like Samuel, puts up a stone, like an actual physical stone erected into the ground, that every time anybody walks by it, that's a signifier of when God broke through right at that moment. So we don't really do that in life anymore. We don't walk everywhere anyway. We drive. And so if you put a stone up, you drive by in a half a second. But you can have those places in life where you can say, that was a moment right there that was a difference maker. And maybe everybody else would drive by that and not notice it. But I know every time I think of that moment, that's an Ebenezer. That's a time that God broke through. It's just a different idea that we don't really think and consider through very frequently. Those moments that we can look back to, unless we actually are purposeful about doing that. And maybe that's the idea. As part of that is you have to choose to be purposeful, not just about how you walk through day to day, but even about how you go, look back through time periods, and consider them. So one of the things I alluded to earlier that we were going to talk about tonight, my wife, let's see, this is December of 2020 of all years. So before 2020 was a thing, my family had 2019. And 2019 for my family was worse than 2020 has been for my family.
Oh, man.
So somewhere in early 2019, my wife got the notion that we were supposed to adopt. And if we were supposed to adopt, kind of walked through a couple of month process of talking about that. We have 4 children already, and we both always, love the idea of children. And as we were walking through that, we were looking at our home, and we're like, wow, our home is so small. We couldn't even pass a home eval to have another child. And so we probably need to buy a bigger house. And so that started us on this journey of a couple of months' time, and that we were like, okay, we'll look at some homes. And when we found one that was going to work, we went ahead and bid on it. We went through the process of, okay, let's get through all the shenanigans involved with financing. We went ahead and we closed on the property. This was on a Wednesday. Now, about 10 days before that closing, my wife was like, hey, there's this lump on my neck. And I'm a physician. I don't practice oncology. I don't practice primary care medicine. I do non-operative sports and spine. Like I help people keep from having surgery on their back or their joints. But she's like, hey, the spot on my neck has a lump. Look at it. And so I looked at it and I was like, yep, that doesn't belong there. And so I got her to see a friend of ours who's an ENT doc. And he'd said, hey, it's, odds are it's probably an infection. I'll give you an antibiotic, but we'll do a CT scan if it doesn't get better. Okay. So we've now closed on this house. We still own our other home. We go out of town for a couple of nights. And the following Monday is when she has a CT scan to look at this lump on her neck. And so, that was one of those things where she was starting to get nervous, and I was like, oh, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And during that weekend, my wife is one of those that crashes at like 9:00 or 9:30. It doesn't matter what we're doing. She's done. And so several times that weekend, I had this like overwhelming urge to pray for her and to pray for her, like for her to be healed. And every time it came up, I just kind of pushed it away. I deflected it the same way we so often deflect things. And that was healed from what? It's going to be nothing. It's going to be fine. We're going to be all good, right? It's all going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And so that Monday, I'm walking out the door in the morning, and I'm getting to almost my truck, and I have this notion again of, I should pray for her, for this thing to be okay, for it to be healed. And then I was like, well, all right, fine. I'll walk back in the house and I'll pray for her. And I probably prayed for 6 seconds. Like I'm not kidding, and so I prayed for her real quick and walked out the door, went to work, no big deal. Well, 3:00 in the afternoon, I get a phone call from my friend who's the ENT doc. And he's like, hey man, there's a whole bunch of lymph nodes like all over that neck that are all lit up. We got to get a biopsy. We've got to get this stuff figured out. We need to figure out what this is so we can start to treat it. And I could hear the fear in his voice as he was telling me this. And so, when you're in medical conversations, you kind of figure stuff out. Like, okay, tell me what's going on. What's the differential diagnosis? And when he couldn't come up with a lot of potential options of what it could be other than cancer, is when it really settled to me like, oh, wow, this is a thing that's starting right now. We weren't planning on this. We just closed on a house 6 days ago. None of this was expected. Yeah. We have 4 children. We're talking about adopting, for goodness sake. Like we're both 40 years old. Like there was no plan for this whatsoever on the horizon. And so, I went home and talked with her about it, and she was real nervous. And, I was again talking with ENT, and he offered 2 different surgeons to do the biopsy. And one of the guys is a guy that I know from F3. Well, I know him not just as a dude who works out hard and a dude who gets out there in the gloom and sweats, but I know the integrity of the man. And I know, what it is that who he is as a dude that you just don't know unless you've been out there, like we have many times, grinding it out together. And so it was a no-brainer to pick that particular surgeon. And that was on a Monday that we talked. And so I didn't want to post the next morning. It was one of those mornings where I just kind of wanted to sleep in and deal with the garbage going on in my life. And I was like, no, I need to get out there and post. And so I walk up, to the circle, and sure enough, here's Blue Cross, who's the surgeon that was going to do the biopsy for her. And he's like, hey, listen, I talked to the other doc. We got everything figured out. Here's what we need to do. Here's how it works. And I'm overwhelmed. I'm emotional already. I'm already kind of like weepy in the face. And I was like, well, what else do we need? And he goes, you know what? He goes, all I need is to get an operating room to be able to do this in tomorrow. So this is on a Tuesday, right? So we go ahead and go, other guys kind of filter in, and we go through the workout that day, and we get to the end of the bomb, and someone's like, here are the prayer requests, and I couldn't bring myself to say anything. Like I was so emotional that I couldn't say anything, and so Mayberry, who's a buddy of mine, speaks up, and so my nickname is Junk. And my wife, for better or for worse, gets referred to as Lady Junk by the guys that are. And so,
oh, man.
So he kind of pushes me a little bit. And I think I got like 6 or 8 words out, like something along the lines of like, we've got a test back that wasn't good and we need another one. And I'm like emotional, and whatever else. The dude standing next to me in the cot and I know him from the hospital. He's a vice president there at the hospital. It's like, hey, what do you need? Anything we can do for you. And I was like, honestly, it sounds like all we need is an operating room. And he's like, done. And so from Monday to Wednesday, here's this intervention of me going out to get in the circle of trust and the circle of pain on Tuesday, and going through a beatdown when I'm really at the verge of my wit's end as far as like how much I can do anything different or whatever. And here's provision, not just of the surgeon who's going to do the procedure, but of the one key person at the hospital who can grease the wheels to make sure it gets done the next day. Like, when does that happen?
Man. I mean, there's no other way. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I don't just want to gloss over that. And I'd love to dive more into that too. But I don't think there's any other way to describe that than a divine encounter, right? I mean, in what world does that just happen, and align like that, you know? And man, that is powerful. That that exact person was supposed to stand right by you in the circle of trust as you shared something really hard,
Yep.
you know? Man, and thank you for sharing that too. You know, I think we have a tendency to do this thing as men, when we get bad news or when we get news that maybe differs slightly from what we thought it was, and we go into this mode of it's going to be okay. You know, I'm going to fix it. I can fix it, and go into this mode. And man, I just want to know, I guess, what was going through your head, I guess, when you got that news, and you know, like you said, there was a lot going on at that time, right? Of you and your wife purchasing a house and thinking about adopting, and all these things were going on, and just, I guess, what was going on in your head, and I guess, where did you pull from to kind of take that day by day?
And really, honestly, what I've laid out is only half the insanity. So the first half of that week was close on the house, go out of town for our 14th wedding anniversary, get that CT scan done. Then it was biopsy on Wednesday. Thursday, we get the diagnosis of Hodgkin's lymphoma. Friday, leave town for a 2-week family vacation, traveling to see my in-laws. Like, it was, we never could possibly have chosen for all that stuff to happen at one time, obviously. I'm, you know, by my nature, I'm somebody who tends to not necessarily deal with the worst possible scenario, but I land more on the what's more likely, or what's a solid good outcome we can probably hope, you know, land on. So it's not about being an optimist. Like, I'm not a 100% optimist. You know, there's some folks who are that's kind of like head in the sand, like maybe it'll all turn out okay. And there's the other end of folks who are more, you know, this is probably going to be the worst possible thing ever. I land in a reasonable place, I feel like, for the most part. But in those moments, when you're in that spot where all of a sudden you just have that horrible news, at least for me, it just was surviving from day to day. And so it really was like getting out there in the circle of trust on that Tuesday morning that made a difference. I posted on Thursday morning that week. Like, she had her biopsy on Wednesday. We were waiting to find out on Thursday. I posted because I didn't know what else to do. I know a lot of people, and we had people already all over the country who were jumping in and wanting to pray, and family and folks like that. That Thursday morning, I didn't want to be anywhere else but in the circle of trust. After having gone through that, after walking up on Tuesday and seeing, here are the 2 interactions I need to have today to make this thing happen, and to know that my wife's in the best possible hands, happened within 45 minutes right there from the you know, the opening of the circle of trust to the bomb. There it is. You know, it just was it was an amazing example of provision. So, you know, so that a realization that started that day and carried on for the next probably 6 weeks or so. And I know it's 6 weeks because I actually shared it in a bomb when I led about 6 weeks later, is this notion of, you know, we talk about God being a God of beauty from ashes, right? And so this realization that I had in the midst of all that was, you can't have beauty from ashes if you don't have ashes in the first place. And where that comes from, I think I was actually reading to my kids in the morning one day, and there's a passage in Isaiah that Jesus actually wrote, that Jesus spoke, or that he read in his hometown synagogue, and he only reads kind of the first half about the Spirit of the Lord being on him and being anointed to speak good news to the poor and to bind up the brokenhearted and proclaim liberty to the captives and those things. As you go farther into the passage, it talks about that he was going to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes and the oil of gladness instead of mourning. And that, like, reading through that just struck home of you have to have good out of bad, you have to have bad first. If everything's good all the time, you can't have good from bad because there's no bad. And the reality is we live in a fallen world there's bad everywhere we look.
That's such a good gold nugget to pull out of that. And, I don't know if many people would be able to say that, right? I don't know if many people would be able to be in that situation, and still be grateful, still have gratitude, and still believe that God is going to provide, and still realize that, hey, okay, we're here. We're supposed to get something out of here. But this is not where we stay. Even though we do have those ashes, this is not the end all be all. And I'm sure that you saw that kind of spill over into different aspects of your life as well, right? What an encouraging thing for your kids to see, right? And for all the way of the men of F3 to hear. That's a word that'll preach right there.
Yeah, and that's just looking back at the first 48 hours after we found out that things actually were bad and not good. And obviously I didn't walk away from that day like rejoicing and jumping up and down. I was grateful for the fact that we'd had those interactions, but I was relieved more than anything else. It was weeks later that, looking back, I could look at that and say, you know what? How crazy is that? That I could not possibly have set that up if I wanted to, but it was already there and ready. And that it happened through the PAX, in Knoxville here, that there are these two dudes on my left and on my right that are the ones that are needed to do that. And how awesome of an opportunity, and I can say this now a year later, how awesome of an opportunity for them to be able to be hands and feet jumping in and significantly affecting one of their brothers' lives just through their normal everyday job. Like, how awesome is that to have those opportunities? Like, how often do we actually walk by those opportunities when we have them? Is the question. So I want to pose a question to you, and this is just kind of making it more normal for everybody. Like, obviously, like, we're talking about this big thing that happened in my life. It's one of those that we don't all experience, and we certainly don't all experience them at certain, an early point or whatever. But what's a time of significant failure, like perceived failure on your part, that you can look back at now and see actually had some pretty significant positive outcomes? You don't have to answer right off the bat.
Oh, man. That's good. No, thank you.
So think about that for a second, because here's I want to wrap back around to what we were talking about, embracing this suck. My family went on most of us on about a 9-month journey from that time in end of June through February when treatment was done. My wife's journey, and I've learned this since then, that the cancer journey lasts a whole lot longer for the patient than it does for the family around, but hers lasted a much longer. But we started that journey then. And so back to this idea of embracing the suck, like, if you look at it beyond just gutting it out through a tough workout when you don't feel like doing it that day, but looking instead at life, embracing the suck is so much more than just being disciplined or being tough or, being willing to work for an extra 6 minutes in the middle of something, or an extra 4 reps when you really want to quit. Or, embracing the suck it can be, if you're willing to let it be, so much bigger than that it can be about looking for the good that comes out of the challenges you run into. And that's what we're talking about tonight, that whole notion of, can you find the positives, the ways that you are being refined, the ways that you are, that whole idea of iron sharpening iron, that's about collision. The way that you are colliding into the experiences of your life and having extra little pieces that don't need to be there knocked off, and having the rough edges sharpened, and having things honed in the position they're supposed to be, so that you can be the best version of what you're supposed to be.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Gosh, that's so good. Oh gosh.
All right, so back to the failure question.
And yes. Okay. Yeah. So the failure question, the one we all love. But a question that we all need to answer too. So, there was something that you just said that ties in really well to this question of some things that need to get knocked off of our lives, right? And it's just part of our story, right? And it's part of the greater story. So I don't know if I've shared this with a lot of F3 guys. So at least guys that don't know me super well, but really the way I found F3 Knoxville was from a pretty massive fallout in what I call the front nine of college. So I kind of separate my college experience into the front nine and back nine. And for very well reason, or for very good reason. And the back nine went a lot better. But the reason I came to Knoxville in the first place, so I'm from Knoxville, born and raised, all that good stuff. Went to school in Chattanooga, TTC, and have built a pretty nice, comfortable identity for myself that was about as far from God as anyone could imagine. So I did the whole fraternity thing, really, wanted to find an identity. So really bought into that. And that became my thing for the first 2 years of college. Looking back, as far as I was concerned, the Holy Spirit was non-existent. I feel like God had given up on me. And so I was just living, just very far away, or what I felt was very far away from the Lord. And so did the whole fraternity thing, like I said. So the first 2 years of college were great. I partied, did all the things that your parents tell you not to do in college. And then around my sophomore year, I started stepping into leadership roles, and whether they were for the right reasons or not, spoiler alert, they weren't, is besides the point. But I really feel like the Holy Spirit started to kind of gut punch me.
Yep.
And I can say that now, but looking back in the middle of it, I was like, why am I feeling like this? Why am I questioning things that I've not really questioned before? And why is this just now kind of coming to the forefront of my mind? Which, looking back, I was like, man, the Holy Spirit was trying to show me something and start to initiate something in me. And so I made a choice to kind of go against the grain with a lot of my really good friends I had established, a lot of my really good friends, males and females, from things that the organization I was a part of, that I knew weren't right, that I had just kind of bought in for so long. It was like, oh, okay, well, I don't have anyone else telling me differently. So looking back, the Holy Spirit kind of got a hold of me and started to check me on these things. And I made a choice that kind of separated me from the pack per se. And it was the right choice to kind of maybe call out some things and stand up for some things that I knew were wrong and that I knew were happening that were wrong. And I got, essentially excommunicated and had a pretty big fallout of leave Chattanooga, basically. And these were guys that, hey, these were my closest friends at the time. Like I said, this was my identity. So I was clinging to this pretty hardcore. And when I made this decision in good faith, thinking this is the right decision, I'm doing the right thing, it was made very apparent that I had not made the right decision in accordance with this community that I was a part of, and so had a lot of fallout, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of things I never encountered, like death threats. I've never had a death threat in my life until like sophomore year of college, and having these people that you're so close to be like you're not safe here. You need to get out, and over following my gut, which is knowing what was right. And once again, I go back to this saying, man, the Holy Spirit had to kind of kick me in the rear because that's how I came back to Knoxville. So I had a hard conversation with my parents of like, hey, I just laid it on the table. Here's what's been going on. Here's what happened. And so the conversation was like, well, you can transfer everything to UT Knoxville. And so that's what I did. And it was good to be home. And there are obviously challenges with that. But I think the Lord really had to teach me how to fail and how to just recognize that like, hey, I'm not in control. Like there's a greater story that I'm a part of, and I don't get to sit in the driver's seat and pretend like I am. And so I think he had to kind of kick me and take me out of that setting, and in a very hard and painful way, bring me back to Knoxville, losing my entire identity. And I found a couple things when I came back to Knoxville. I found F3 Knoxville for one, which has been a game changer for a young man in college who's trying to find his identity. Is desperately needing men of impact to look up to and men of character to look up to. I found an organization called The Cross, which is a Greek life ministry at the University of Tennessee here. That was incredibly redemptive for me from a community that I felt like I'd really gotten burned by and had a lot of hurt by, a lot of pain and scars from. It's almost funny how the Lord brought me to this ministry and kind of restored that in me, and was just very kind in doing so. Found the Knoxville Fellows that G6 heads up as well, and so there was a long time, probably about a year, where I was like, I don't understand how any of this happened. I feel like a failure. I feel like I messed up. Like, why did this have to happen? Why am I here? And then looking back now, it's like, man, that had to happen. Like, I think God had to really teach me that lesson. And I think God really had to kind of check me pretty hard. So he could show me his goodness and show me good things like the cross, like F3, like the fellows, and bring me to this point. And so speaking of an embrace the suck kind of story, I was like, man, that really sucked. But now I can go into settings and things that are really hard down the road and kind of point back to that as like, okay, that sucked. But the Lord was still with me, and he was still showing me things through that entire process, and still is,
No, totally.
Sorry, that was lengthy.
So how long would you say it was from when you first realized that there was something wrong and you started having the notion, just that gut feeling of I got to change something, to when you could actually look back and not only recognize the value in the situation, but ascribe intent at different times to, what F3 loves to call the sky cue driving you through this?
Yeah. So that happened in 2015. That being when I made the move back to Knoxville, so around November, December in 2015. And it probably wasn't until honestly, probably about I would say almost a year. So probably October of 2016, where I went on a fall break trip with the Cross. So with all these Greek life guys and gals from UT, that I was very nervous about just because of that past trauma from Chattanooga. And I think that's when the Lord really started to kind of invite me into a space of, hey, let me show you some things, like I know you're really hurting, and I know you feel like you're alone and like you lost everything and you just got totally displaced. But I really think that on that fall break trip and kind of going into 2017 as well, that's when things started to click. And I think that's when my eyes were really open and the Lord was very kind in showing me like, I was with you the entire time, and I have so many good things for you in life, and I have such a good plan for your life, but you got to trust me, you know. And I needed you to go through that because now you can use that when you talk to other people, and so that was the beauty of getting to do the cross, the Greek life ministry at UT, because I got to use something really hard in my life that I just walked through, and in turn get to share that as a point of, hey, God was really good in this. Yeah, it was really hard, but I've been where you're at. I've been in that seat that you're sitting in right now to these guys and gals that were in the Greek life community at UT, and so I think the Lord started to help me connect the dots. It started to open my eyes a lot more.
That again just goes right back to that notion of iron sharpening iron. Like if we at 22 or 32 or 62 think that we are a full, complete product and as good as it's going to get, like we're fooling ourselves. We should be constantly being molded and improved and better. The whole idea of no one left behind, we land on that, but no one left the same. And that means all of us every single day not being left the same as we were yesterday, let alone a year ago.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, I mean, finding F3 the January, February after I moved back to Knoxville, I mean, I have never been the same, really. I mean, I have never been the same after leaving the cot that first time, because there were guys that I got to look up to and still look up to and get to look up to every time I posted F3 of like, man, that is a man after God's heart, or man, that is a high impact man, and coming from not necessarily seeing that a ton as a younger guy. Man, what a gift that was. Like that I didn't necessarily appreciate fully for the first couple months of F3, but man, what a gift that was, and still is for me being a younger man in F3. But coming out of that, kind of embrace the suck moment, and getting to then get to speak to that, and encourage that story
even,
as well.
Not just even being on the younger end. Like I got a chance during our whole process last year to see guys that I had spent plenty of time sweating with, and lots of time laughing with, and lots of time, working hard, whether with service projects or doing a Ragnar or whatever. But I got to watch those guys show up in my life in a way that I couldn't even have asked for, that I couldn't have known I needed, but they stepped in. There were people, I kid you not, one of my guys, Mayberry, traveled probably to 10 different states during the whole time we were going, and everywhere he posted, they were praying for Lady Junk. And time after time they'd be like, just go with it. Like it's my guy's M. There were people all over the country just through F3. They were praying for my wife as we walked through. I forgot to mention this before. I had already gotten suckered into head coaching my son's tackle football team, my at the time 9-year-old's team, or 10, I guess he was, and it was the last thing I wanted to do once we found out that that what her diagnosis was and the treatment plan and all this chemotherapy we have to do and get ready for radiation and multiple different surgeries and stuff. But it was I saw the opportunities I had with the men in the cot, and I saw the opportunities I had with these boys, and to say, what, I'm gonna choose to be what I said I would be walking into this, with those guys. And here, every time I'd come home, I couldn't tell you how often I'd come home and there'd be one of the guys from F3 who was helping move something in our house, or who was dropping something off to take care of my family, or who guys were calling and texting regularly and just saying, hey, what do you need? Is there anything? I mean, I got to the point where I had to come up with things to let people be involved with, because I was just so overwhelmed. I couldn't tell you what was happening this afternoon, let alone tomorrow or 2 weeks from now. But having the opportunity to see all of those men step in, not just in the practice that we have a couple of times a week at F3 where we're working hard, but actually in real life when it matters in someone else's life, like what a blessing. So you can get that from the first day in the cot and on through for years and years. I think this is my 5th year in F3. And just being able to see those moments where the ironing sharpening iron has worked and the iron is sharp and guys jump right in and are impacting each other's lives it's a beautiful thing to see.
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, that's where it counts, right? I mean, that's where we would expect men of impact to show up outside that cot. And I know that we discussed so the first 48 hours or so, but I know you mentioned 2019 was almost a harder year for your family than 2020. So for you and your kids and wife, I guess, what did that look like? And just like you saw some F3 guys stepping up and just really caring for you guys well. What did that process look like for you?
So we kind of had that whirlwind, as I mentioned, of, we close in the house, we get this CT scan, get a biopsy done, we're out of town for a week or two. By the time we were back in town, in fact, before we even finished that 2-week plan, my wife and I had both flown back into town to get some more tests done. She was planning to start chemotherapy within probably 2 weeks of us getting back. Right when we were supposed to be closing on the house that we were selling and moving. And so even in that process, we had some movers that we worked with to move stuff. Well, there was like an entire garage full of stuff that we forgot to include. And so I just had to reach out to one of the guys and be like, hey, I don't know if some dudes can show up and help, but we need to move this whole garage worth of stuff from the house we're in now to the house that we're going to be in. And in my mind, this is going to be like a 2-day affair because literally it was absolutely full. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't involved in the process, but when the time comes for guys to show up, I open the garage door and here's 6 guys, some of them bringing their 2.0s and with trucks and trailers. And we unloaded the entire garage in an hour and a half and drove it 10 minutes across town and filled the other garage in like 30 minutes. And here's this 2-day project that's done in 2 hours because guys didn't just say, hey, let me know if I can help, but they jumped up and showed up when the opportunity was there. And so if there's a challenge in this whole thing, it is when you're that dude who has an inclination for a moment that, hey, I could help with that, just do it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't follow it's kind of inconvenient, or just jump in there and be involved.
Absolutely. Because we all need that. And we've all had guys do that in our lives, and we should expect to do that in other guys' lives as well. And you mentioned 2.0s as well, which I think is really cool. What a good role model, what a good representation that we get to live out for our 2.0s, if you have 2.0s, right? Or even other guys 2.0s as well, of, hey, let me take you aside and let me just live authentically so you can see what this looks like from a high impact man perspective. I mean, what a cool thing for a 2.0 to see, for men to step into roles and to help and to live with impact in real life, in real time. And that's something
you think about, American culture and even American Christian culture. It's usually women that end up stepping into most of those roles, and that's not a knock on them. In fact, if anything, it's a significant T-claps for the women who do that so often. But here in our lives, my boys got to see not just the wives of the dudes that I work out with and that we live life together with, but the men themselves coming over and showing up. And it wasn't just that one time; it was over and over and over again. I mean, every time there was a need that we had, I most of the time wouldn't even have told somebody, but somebody would figure it out and they'd reach out and here's a dude or two coming over. It just taken an hour out of their day. And here my 4 2.0s got to see that time after time after time. And I had opportunity to talk to them about that and, express not just gratitude, but say, like, this is what we do. This is how we care for people. When they can't care for themselves, we help and care for them. We step in. And I'll tell you, I mean, we're now nearly a full year from when my wife finally in December got the all clear from her oncologist after a pretty significant scare that we had a couple weeks before that. But she got the all clear from the oncologist about 3 weeks from now. we're almost a year later. I have regular conversations with my 2.0s about how we look to care for other people, and not just our closest friends, and not just the people that we're nearest to, but the folks who need it the most in our community. It's been a complete game changer for my whole family as far as the experiences we've had. They give us opportunity then to look forward toward the future. So that whole idea of embracing the suck isn't just a one moment, one time. It is embracing it for the long haul. And the benefits to be reaped are huge if you're willing to latch on and to hold on, and then they keep looking for the value to pull out of there.
Wow. Well, and praise God for your wife being healthy too, man. I mean, what a blessing, seriously. Yeah, man, that is so good to hear.
And I will tell you, we could spend probably another 10 hours of me just telling you how impressed I was with her as we walked through this process. Yeah. And she did her best, and she muscled through what she could muscle through, and she was gracious enough to be willing to go to bed when I would ask her to go to bed when she was exhausted and couldn't stay awake. And, but I am so tremendously blessed of a man to have the wife that I have and the children that I have. And to look at that and say, you know what, I'm not excited about what we had to walk through, but I am absolutely grateful for all of the benefits that have come from it. And they are, I haven't even seen all of them. They are almost endless, the benefits that have come through the experience we had last year. No one would choose to do that. And maybe that's the other idea about the embrace the suck. Like, no one would choose to walk through a very unsure cancer diagnosis that absolutely could have gone the wrong way. In fact, when we first started with the diagnosis of Hodgkin's lymphoma, that's a cancer that's very treatable. And about 90% of people on the first pass of treatment have resolution and have no more symptoms. Only about 10% have further symptoms. Well, we got about 4 months into treatment, and all of a sudden the oncologists are saying, hey, this doesn't look right. And so we do another test, and they're like, you know what? This is actually not responding to treatment. And so then we flipped from that 90% category into that small 10% category. And within that category, you're looking at 50-50 odds. That's a coin flip for a couple of 40-year-old kids and their 4 children. Like, what a stark reality change to walk from one into the other. And then within a month, come around to, further testing and biopsies and these things. And oh, by the way, I guess, you know what? We don't think you do have cancer still. You're good to go. I mean, it just was this like roller coaster of back and forth and back and forth. And, but because the first 3 or 4 months, like we had been walking through all of this stuff with such tremendous support, those 3 or 4 weeks of craziness, it just seemed like, kind of like when you first got to F3 and the first couple of days, you're like, I feel terrible for days afterwards. I'm sore. I'm achy. This hurts. That hurts. But once you've been there for months on end, you have a brutal workout that some joker puts together and is terrible, and everybody complains about it the entire time. And for a week afterwards, you're like, and the hamstrings are still thanking you. Appreciate it, shooter. Way to go. Good job, But you've done so much of the hard work, and you put it in line so that you can actually do that. And that's what those last few weeks ended up being. Is we'd spent 5 months worth of being as submitted as we could to the Lord, of being as open and clear about what we were doing, trying to be as reasonable as possible with our thought process. That, the week before Kim's last appointment in Chicago, of all places, we were sitting there with the elders and pastors of our church praying, and I didn't have anything else even to ask for, because we'd already gone through all of the right steps and we already had the right mentality. And we walked in their office a week later, and they're like, hey, we can't find any cancer. And yeah, exactly. Wow. It was unbelievable.
What a blessing.
I mean, and like I said, we could spend hours and hours and hours talking about all the various layers of those things, but what a miraculous intervention into life. Very similar to the story that you were telling us about your, like you spent 2 years building a life, and all of a sudden in a couple of weeks we're like, wow, this life has to change. and you're willing to take that faithful step, and that, let's be honest, like how many of us could walk into our parents' living room and be like, hey, let me tell you what my life's been like the last 2 years. You know, I've been there myself. I had one of those myself about 20 years ago. But how many times, people can do that? But you go through the arduous challenge. And on the other side, it's not just, okay, life is better. And you kind of begrudgingly are like, well, okay, life is better because I went through this hard thing. But you can truly look back and be absolutely grateful for the fact that you dealt with the brutality of those situations and got to the other side.
Yes. Yes. And that is a position that I feel like we are called to be in, to be grateful, and to praise, right? And just to look around and realize how much we actually have that we should be grateful for, right? Oh man, when you think about, I guess, so you and your wife's and your family's experience for the past couple years here, have there been any just significant breakthroughs that have kind of just come to the forefront of your mind, or things that you will remember, that you'd like to share with our guys?
You know, probably the biggest breakthrough, other than that notion, I mean, I'll be honest, like that I kind of threw it out there early, but that idea of you can't have beauty from ashes without ashes that's a life changer. It really is. But probably the one massive breakthrough that came to me, and actually came to my wife through one of our neighbors. I'm actually going to read this, if that's okay. It's from a bomb that I gave.
It's perfect.
So it starts with the passage from Hebrews 12. Therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that's set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And that's, it's obviously a tremendously familiar passage if you've been around Christianity at all. And even if you haven't been, you're still going to have heard some of those terms. So this is the bomb that I threw out to the guys that day. Many of us have heard this passage a lot. Typically, when I think of running a race, I think of running a race together. We think of a marathon or an obstacle course race or a 5K or just a sprint across the parking lot. But we think about doing it all in the same course at the same time and all together at the same moment. The reality is, in life, none of us runs the same course as each other. We may run pieces of it together. We may have parts that look similar or even almost identical, and the finish line is the same, obviously, but we all run our own course. Oftentimes we find ourselves looking at other people and complaining that they've got it easy, like they're just running downhill the whole time. Or on occasion, we'll look at someone else and recognize that they've got it a lot harder than we do. Maybe they're running uphill and climbing over obstacle after obstacle. The reality is we just wouldn't choose the hard stuff that comes our way. No one that day got to choose what I had them do in our workout. What they got to choose is how hard they worked and whether they lifted up their teammate or dragged them down. If you go back to the passage, the writer of Hebrews had just gotten done laying out a litany of other historical heroes, many of whom suffered unbelievable hardships. I don't know about you, but I've never been sawn in two. Individualize the charge. Run with endurance the race that's set before you. You have to run the course that's laid before you. You can't run my course for me, and Steam, I can't run your course for you. Largely, you do not get to choose what you have to go through in life. You just get to choose how good or bad an attitude to have and how hard you work. The good news is that we do get to help each other along the way, and we can shoulder each other's burdens, and we can cheer each other on. But we each have to run the course that's laid out in front of us. And that was an absolutely life-changing thought process, and it came within a week after Kim's diagnosis.
Man, what a
Absolutely.
bomb. Thank you for sharing that. Gosh, it's powerful.
It's a challenging thing for us to run into because we spend most of our lives comparing ourselves to other people. and we spend most of our lives looking around, just kind of like we do when we're, honestly, when we're working out in the gloom, you're kind of glancing around and like, oh, this is easy for that guy. Oh, that guy's definitely, he must be cheating reps because it's so much easier for him than it is for me, or I'm really crushing it today. I'm working hard to get all of my reps in, and those guys are finishing too quickly, or we do tons of comparing. But the reality is, every single one of us has to run the course laid in front of us, and most of us would never choose the hard things in life. And I would be a liar if I told you, if I was in that moment back last summer, that I would choose to walk through 9 months worth of treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma and the scare of potentially losing my wife, not once, but like twice in that process. I would be a liar if I said I wanted to do that. But on the other end, if I can look back and say, you know what, that's the pathway that was put in front of us. And I know for a fact that I've had stuff knocked off of me, and I've been molded and I've been sharpened. And so has my wife, and so have my children, and so has the future of, of our family. I'm not only okay with it, I'm grateful for it. And that's a hard place to come to.
That is a hard place to come to, because you would never wish that for someone else, right? You would never wish that on anyone else. But gosh, you are a better molded, pruned. I don't want to say junk. You're a better, more pruned to junk. No,
yes,
like you're a better and more improved, high impact man, because of that, and just like you said, how can you not be grateful for that, right? And that is a really hard place to be, and a hard place to come mentally. Because then the question asks, well, then why did I have to go through that? Like what was the point of that in the grander scheme of things? And we may never know that, right? Like that may never get revealed to us the way we want it to.
And so what I would say is, when we find ourselves in that place, it's fine to ask that question if you can ask it loosely and walk away from it. But if you're really, truly like bitter about that question, you're asking the wrong question. When we look at, even we keep comparing it back to just a simple 45-minute workout in the gloom. If you get to the other end, you're like, what was the point of me going through that? Well, there's lots of points of you going through that. Yeah, sure, you burned some goo, and there's a lot of it, but you were next to the guys you were next to. Maybe it was about you encouraging the dude who is in worse shape than you are and was the whole time just kind of faking it. Maybe it was about you needing to go through that experience so that 6 months from now, you've got another cue that you're part of. It's like, oh, I remember how that one was. Like, we can't possibly know all those details. But if instead we're asking the question in a positive fashion, not a negative, like, why did I have to go through that? But why am I going through this? What is it that I can pick up? What can I learn? Like, that is what embracing the suck is. Embracing the suck is not, well, this is going to be terrible for 45 minutes or 45 days or for 45 years. There's going to be parts of this that are awful, but there is value. There's gold to be mined from this experience. What is it? Let's find it and go about, maximizing the effect of this and getting the best we can out of it. And it's easier sometimes than others. I'm not going to pretend like that's like a simple thing, but.
Absolutely. Yes. Nail on the head. And I think what you just described is a reframing of that mindset. You have to. I mean, you have to reframe and retrain your mind on how you think about those things and that dialogue that you entertain when it comes to that thing. Oh, that's so good.
I think if I had to simplify it, I would say, why do we embrace the suck? We embrace the suck because you can't have good without bad. There's going to be some bad. There's going to be some negative. There's going to be some challenge, whether it's a workout or life. You embrace the crap because you can't have good from bad without bad.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Gosh, have you written the book?
Yeah. I probably talk enough that I could have. Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, brother. Hey, I just want to say thank you so much for just taking time out of your day to be on this, but also just for sharing about your life, man. It is so encouraging just to be around you. So for all of our listeners, if you've never posted with junk, make that happen before 2021, or definitely make it a goal 2021. But just also just getting to hear the way you talk and inspire people. Man, it has just been an honor to listen to you and just really learn from you as well tonight. So
Yeah, I
I really
appreciate the
appreciate you
invitation,
for that.
and I am one of those that once I start talking, it doesn't stop very easily. But it's just a blessing to be able to kind of have this back and forth and talk through things. I mean, I think the reality is with life experiences like you were describing earlier, and like I was describing, there are so many nuances and layers. It's hard to get them all out. So I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the future at some point about some of this stuff. But it's a blessing to be with other high impact men of everything from 15 years old to 65 or however old we have here at F3 Knoxville. It's just a blessing.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, my friend. Well, like we do with every episode, we're gonna do a little Name-O-Rama. So, my friend,
Sam Yoakum,
go ahead.
40, junk.
Junk. And this is Dan Henson, 26, Steam.